Hello, everyone. We're going to wait just another 1 or 2 minutes to make sure everyone can join, and then we'll get started. Well, good morning and good afternoon for the people who joined us. My name is M.Sc. I am the head of marketing and US operations at Civan Lasers, and I'm delighted to have here with me Karen Schwarzkopf from the Laser Photonics Technology Institute, who will give a webinar on dynamic beam shaping and direct energy depositioning, laser powder bed manufacturing, and process observation and adjustable microstructure. So Karen is finishing her PhD studies at the Laser Photonics Technology Institute, which is part of the Friedrich-Alexander-Universität in Nuremberg, Germany. She has done her studies on the dynamic beam laser influence in metal additive manufacturing, both on laser powered bed fusion and direct energy depositioning. And I'm very happy to have her here with us to share her results and insights on how dynamic beam laser can influence these processes. And with no further ado, the floor is yours, Karen.
Thank you very much, Ami, for this kind introduction, and also welcome from my side. As already introduced, I'm Karen Schwarzkopf, and I'm currently pursuing my PhD at the Institute of Photonic Technologies in Erlangen-Nürnberg, Germany. And before directly heading into the, well, yeah, let's say technical points, let me allow to quickly give you a short overview of who is the Institute of Photonic Technologies and what we are normally or all day are, well, yeah, dealing with. So the Institute of Photonic Technologies was kind of emerging from a Institute of Manufacturing Technologies, where they figured out that laser radiation sources are pretty, yeah, let's say cool things and need to be understood well in a scientific context. So this is when in 2009, the Institute was funded. And since then, our head or chair is Professor Dr. Michael Schmidt. We are associated with the Mechanical Engineering Department at the Friedrich-Alexander-Universität in Erlangen-Nürnberg, which is located in the, well, yeah, beautiful landscape of Franconia in Bavaria, Germany. And we are around 40 employees that are dealing with different topics as follows. So we are basically grouped in 5, well, yeah, groups. And in the center, we call it, it's the simulation, modeling, and sensing control group that allows us to kind of combine the findings that we're gathering in the other departments. Basically, the ultra-short pulse laser technologies, the additive manufacturing department, and also photonics and medicine. And recently, we also made up a joining technologies group. So I'm somewhere in between here, and here. And yeah, what I also wanted to share with you is that we have a lot of national, but also international scientific cooperations that are spanning from the German synchrotron radiation facility that's called DESI towards all over the world, to University of Osaka, Singapore, but also in the US, like Princeton University with Professor Greg Arnold, and also University of Oxford with Professor Booth. Besides scientific cooperations, we are also dealing with a lot of industrial cooperations, and those who are listed here are only like a short extract of what we are actually doing. They are, well, yeah, all located in Germany, but we are not really restricted to Germany, and they are, yeah, big companies like Siemens, Bosch, and also automotive companies like Audi, Bose, and Schaeffler. Okay, now I think it's enough from the advertisement block, and I would like to really jump into the technical topics. Now, Ami already mentioned that I'm dealing today with the directed energy deposition process. And for those of you who are not really familiar with that, I would like to give you a short introduction how this, well, yeah, additive manufacturing technology is working. So basically, what it looks like is we have a laser radiation path, which is indicated here. And what we are now doing is we are delivering powder through a nozzle into the, well, melt pool that is created by our laser radiation. And for sure, we are also having shielding gas that is basically creating an atmosphere that allows us to get rid of oxides and, well, yeah, really turbulences that we don't want to have in our process. And this, well, process allows us basically to have a generation of 3D geometries. And it is not only restricted to that, it's also, well, originally coming from laser material deposition. So basically a single layer that allows us to really create differences, for instance, in our hardness or also having repair work done. And to get a better understanding of the process, I also brought a video, which I think really nicely visualizes how the process actually works. So as already mentioned, we have a powder nozzle, and our powder is delivered into the melt pool that is created by laser radiation. And basically, by adding this additional material to the melt pool, we can create a deposited track and get a 3D geometry. And as you can see, different approaches, different abilities, and yeah. All right. Now, we, well, are all familiar, I think, with laser material processing. And I assume that all of you kind of know or have experienced in the past that an inappropriate input of thermal energy is provoking defects. And in the context of additive manufacturing, such defects can be crack formation, as I highlighted here on the side, cold cracks. It can also come to geometrical accuracies or, yeah, changes in the geometrical accuracy. We also are facing gas porosity issues, which indicate or diminish the mechanical properties of our part in the end. Another defect associated with a lack of thermal energy is lack of fusion. And also to mention can be the inhomogeneous microstructure that is forming due to an inappropriate heat input. Now, in the past, or let's say conventional additive manufacturing processes, we are normally using Gaussian intensity distribution. This is that we have the intensity concentrated in the center of our melt pool. And now we have the opportunity with the Civan system, but also different approaches based on beam shaping to really adjust these thermal properties during the additive manufacturing process. And on the next slide, I would like to give you a short overview of what typical approaches do exist to adjust our thermal fields based on the adjustment of our laser intensity distribution. So On the left side, you can see a diffractical optical element. This is basically an optical element that is based on diffraction. So basically what is happening is the light is guided into this optical element, and changes in refractive index, the light ray is kind of bended. These approaches, however, are limited to spatial manipulation of the intensity distribution. So that means that we have no opportunity to really adjust certain things during our process. A more advanced approach of beam shaping are so-called fiber core adjustments, which can be, for instance, a fiber core shaped as a square, but also a bit more advanced techniques that have a predefined spatial intensity distribution between a power in the center beam and a ring beam. And these approaches, for instance, from coherent, allow to shift the power between the core beam and the ring beam, as demonstrated in the video here. So basically, we are able to have kind of a temporal adjustment of our intensity distribution. But still, we are restricted to 4-point intensity distributions. The more advanced approach that allows us to have spatial and temporal manipulation of the intensity distribution during our additive manufacturing are deformable mirrors. It's basically like an element, as you can see here, that consists of multiple small mirrors. And these mirrors can be addressed individually, allowing to really distribute the energy in time and space. However, these approaches are restricted to a temporal resolution of 100 Hertz, meaning that we are restricted in the time span that allows us to really change between these intensity distributions. Now, why is it even important to get an understanding of spatial and temporal adjustment of the intensity distribution? The short answer is we are able to get flexibility by adapt to different requirements during the printing process. So if we are able to adjust our intensity distribution not only in space but in time, it would be possible to change, for instance, geometrical structures, as you can see here as an example on the left side. It might also help us to print different materials because we are really able to adjust our thermal properties. And what is also one idea of this approach is that we are really able to get a functional grading, meaning that we can adjust, for instance, microstructural or mechanical properties depending on our building height. Right. Now, I've been talking a lot about different approaches of beam shaping, and you're all here to understand how the Civan system is working. And this system really differs from other, technologies, as it combines basically 32 single laser beams. And to get a better understanding of how this technology is really working, I brought this video with me that basically, visualizes the approach of coherent beam combining. So instead of having one single beam, we basically split a seed laser into 32 individual channels. And these 32 individual channels are then phase shifted, meaning that a constructive and deconstructive interference is created in the far field and basically allows to create arbitrary beam shapes. To get a better understanding of how this is looking, let's say in reality, I brought you a snippet of the software that Civan is providing, and wanted to show you how to create, let's say, such an intensity distribution. So basically what is happening, we have a 32 by 32 grid. It can also be 64 by 64 grid. which allows you to distribute energy packages in. And in the most simple case, by pointing a energy package in the middle, you can create a point-like beam profile that resembles a Gaussian intensity distribution. What is now happening if you're starting to distribute the energy in different fields is demonstrated here. For instance, for a square-like intensity distribution, you can see by accordingly putting the energy packages in the edges, a square-like intensity distribution is created. And these two beam shapes are rather ordinary, I would call it. And you can see on the next slide that even more challenging beam shapes can be created on the run in a really easy way, just by distributing these energy packages within this grid. All right. What is now possible as well is that we are able to combine these different beam shapes. And I brought a small video with me that demonstrates what is happening if we are, for instance, switching between the Civan laser logo and the logo of the Institute of Photonic Technologies. And a beam shape sequence basically combines different beam shapes, and up to 32 beam shapes can be matched together. And by now changing the duration of each beam shape, different influences can be created. Since we are not putting like a mask of intensity distribution on our beam shapes, but we are rather scanning our beam shape, there's also a third characteristic of the laser, and that's the so-called beam shape frequency. This basically defines how long each point is resting at a position in time. And just as a additional grab, I wanted to show you a short video that demonstrates that this beam shape frequency also is really influencing our process. So on the left side, you can see a video that is created with a spiral beam shape at a 5 kilohertz beam shape frequency. And on the right side, you can see a spiral, the same intensity distribution, working with a 20 kilohertz frequency. And what is now happening is, you can see that the melt pool is really differing, and not only the melt pool, but also like the evaporation. And I don't want to go into detail here. This will be part of the very last slides, because in this presentation, I want to focus on the beam shape frequency. Before heading into the results, I first want to introduce you our machine concept, because I think some of you are really asking, okay, how can you now implement this laser into a really industrial DED machine? And this is the answer. So basically, our DED machine was funded by the German Research Foundation with the scope of having in-situ alloying deposition based on beam shaping. So this basically means that we have a Civan laser incorporated in a DED cell. And this cell looks, if you're now looking inside it, like this. What you can see here is, first glance, the processing head, where all the powder is, gathered into the material or the substrate surface. The powder itself is directed from these powder feeders here. We have 4 of them, which allows us to combine 4 different powder mixtures in the process zone. What we also have is a different approaches to really measure the temperature, but also the surface roughness of our process. And in general, we can say that we have different focal lengths that allow us to steer the beam shape size. I think one important thing to mention, I nearly forgot, is that we have a 5-axis system, which allows us to really move our workpiece underneath of the laser path. So we do not employ any scanner optics here, but are really moving our workpiece in 5 different directions, so translational and also rotational directions. Now, if you're turning inside the cell, we also can see a robot and different other modules. So the idea is that we can really automatically develop different alloying compositions. And this will be done by a robot, which helps us to grab the different samples, put it into the material processing zone. Then processing is happening. And after that, the robot is taking the sample into a cleaning chamber, where it then is subsequently analyzed by chemical deposition based on a LIBS, laser-induced breakdown spectroscopy approach. Okay, this is how it's generally looking, but at the moment we are more interested in understanding how these different beam shapes influence our material processing approach. And therefore, we did employ a high-speed camera system that allows us to coaxially observe our process zone, which is highlighted here by the green dot. We also employed a ratio pyrometer in order to get thermal information from the process. And additionally, we were also employing an illumination laser to visualize different aspects of our melt pool. Important to mention is again the powder nozzle, which is highlighted here in yellow, where 3 different channels from the powder supplier are merging together, feeding powder into the melt. All right. On the left side, you can see the dimensions of the field of view from the camera coaxially, and also the ratio pyrometer up here. Maybe one short announcement for the ratio pyrometer. It's basically an approach that allows to derive temperature information only based on a ratio between 2 frequency spectra. So we do not need emissivity values in order to get thermal information. Okay. Now, the first question that we were asking ourselves is whether the influence of dynamic beam shaping is already detectable in single weld tracks during the DED process. And for those of you who know my presentation already, the short answer is yes. And this is visualized here in these 2 high-speed videos that compare the point intensity distribution to a ring distribution. And as you can see, it's not only the size that is differing for the 2 beam shapes, but also, for instance, the influence of these higher modes that are placed here, and the powder impingement is happening earlier for the ring. So basically what follows from this video, that the beam shape is stamped into the substrate. And since we are a research institute, this answer is not sufficient for us. And therefore, we employed the following methodology to answer the research question. And basically, we were comparing 5 different beam shapes, which I will be go into detail on the next slide. We were then using in-situ process analysis, basically high-speed imaging and thermal process analysis, to understand how dynamic beam shaping is influencing our melt pool dimensions. For instance, the melt pool area, but also the morphology, and also the melt pool temperature. And as the next step, we wanted to correlate these findings with ex situ characterization, like for instance, the microstructure, but also the resulting hardness. As already mentioned, we combined 5 different beam shapes, and the order of sequence was as follows. As initial beam shape, a point was employed solely as a reference compared to a Gaussian intensity distribution that is conventionally used. Next, a square-like intensity distribution was employed, as it was reported in literature that a homogenization of the temperature field can be achieved by that, followed by a triangular shape that is directing, or differently put, the rear or the tip of the triangle is directing opposite to the feed direction. And this is followed by a ring shape, and then a triangle shape that is located the opposite direction, namely the tip is facing into the feed direction. And as already mentioned before, the technology of coherent beam combining comes with, let's say, some restrictions, or at least some things that are have to be considered. Namely, not all of the intensity is gathered in the main lobe, which is highlighted here in the red area, but also some parts are located in the side lobes. And how this influences our melt pool geometry will be shown in the next two slides. What is important to mention is that the beam shapes here were conceptualized in such a way that the length or width was kept constant in order to really relate differences that are observed to the beam shape itself and not to the size. Short overview again of the process parameters. The experiments that I'm going to talk about in the next slides were all conducted with a 500 watt, a feed rate of 400 millimeter per minute, and a powder mass flow of 2.9 gram per minute. As material, a hot working tool steel was employed, which is also known as H11, and the substrate was made of the same material. Now let's jump into the first findings, which are, dealing with the melt pool geometry and the process stability. Here you can see the in-situ video from the melt pool geometry. And on the position here, it's the resulting top view of the weld seam. And as you can see directly from the video, when changing beam shape, we also do see differences in our weld topology. And we can really see the differences of the beam shapes already in our melt pool. And I think one thing that also has to be mentioned here is that these changes do occur in a repetitive way, meaning that the dynamic beam shaping approach is really leading to a repetitive material response. So in that case, each beam shape was repeated 3 times, and the time between the beam shapes was 300 milliseconds, which is important for the interpretation of the following diagram. What I did here is basically I created the mean value of all images that are associated with the point, the mean value of all images that are associated with the square, and so on and so on. And I was investigating the melt pool area. And I think what is quite, clear is that the point, since we had a reduced beam shape diameter, also results in the smallest melt pool area. But what is interesting to see is that for the more complex beam shapes, we do see differences. And these differences do not only rely on the melt pool area, but also on the stability, which is indicated by these blue lines, blue transparent lines, which are basically the standard deviation for the 3 repetitions. And what is now interesting to see is that we get the highest melt pool area for the square. And this is also really correlating with the highest powder catchment efficiency here for the square, and followed by the ring. And what is now interesting to see is that we do have like a decrease of the melt pool area when we're switching, especially from the square and the ring intensity distribution towards the triangular shapes. And this is associated with differences in the melt pool flow behavior. For instance, the Marangoni flow can be named here, but further research, especially regarding simulation, have to be conducted to really grab the differences here. But what we can see is that it takes a certain time, around 100 milliseconds, to really change or to really stabilize again the melt pool behavior. Now, if we are switching to the melt pool morphology, which is also well known to influence microstructural appearances, it is interesting to see this for the ring. Basically, that not only the main lobe, so basically this area here, but also the side lobe is incorporating the melt pool itself, which is highlighted here. And this molten zone is followed by a heat affected zone, as we can see it in the cross-section analysis. And this heat affected zone again is followed by a tempered zone, as shown here by the blue tempering coloring. And this is the melt pool shape. We can see that it's not really incorporating a circular shape as we would expect from a ring, but we really see a dented shape coming from that beam shape here. And if we are now doing the same for the other beam shapes, we can again see that all parts of our intensity distribution are really mirrored in our melt pool morphology. This is the north-facing triangle, and also the same for the other three beam profiles. What is really interesting to see as well is the point profile, because here we can see not only one main melt pool, but also smaller side lobes, melt pools that are correlating with the position of those side lobes. So this means that here the melt pool, the intensity is high enough to also melt our material. And if we are now comparing the morphology of our melt pools, we can see two types, namely the ring and the square beam shapes, which have like a straight transition between the melt pool and the solid material, whereas the other three beam shapes rather have a teardrop-like melt pool, where we are expecting different conditions of cooling behavior depending of the center and the sides. So in the side, we're expecting to have a slower cooling compared to the sides. All right. Now, we have seen that we do see differences in our melt pool size. We do see differences in our melt pool morphology. Now, the next question is, how does that affect the temperature that is related to our different intensity profiles? And based on the pyrometer investigation, we can see the following. So let me basically introduce the whole figure to you. First of all, this is a longitudinal cross-section, and this really reveals that by applying these different beam shapes, we also do have different penetration depths. So it's not only the outer appearance or top view appearance that is changing, but also like the penetration inside the material. And what is now interesting to see is that those beam shapes, basically the ring and the square, that exhibit the least penetration depth to exhibit the highest measured temperature. And what is again interesting to see is that we can really get a change in our temperature distribution, or not distribution, temperature measured, depending on our beam shapes. And since the ratio pyrometer is relying only on a one-dimensional temperature profile, we also wanted to investigate how does that really look in the two-dimensional temperature field. And we did some more additional temperature measurements with a thermal camera. And this looks like this. Basically, what we can see here is that we have the same tendency regarding our mean temperature. The square and the ring beam profile exhibit higher temperatures compared to the triangular and the point-like profiles. And from this observation, we, well, yeah, do expect to see differences also in our microstructure. And this can be seen on the next slide. All right. So for the point-like intensity distribution, we do see a cellular solidification morphology, or most likely a cellular solidification morphology. Whereas when we are now heading to the beam shapes that are exhibiting higher thermal or mean temperatures, we are getting columnar solidification morphologies. And this is really interesting again, because the differences that we could see in the temperature do really occur in our melt pool, in our microstructure as well. And now we would expect to have the triangular beam shapes to be somewhere in between here and here, because here we were measuring the lowest temperature, whereas here we were measuring the highest temperature. And this hypothesis is also confirmed in the optical microscopy images, where we can see also a cellular solidification morphology for the two triangular beam shapes. And in order to really understand what is, well, yeah, going on a microscopic level, further investigations with a scanning electron microscope, but also a EBSD approach need to be conducted. We are into that and really want to understand, for instance, how, or if we can see differences in our grain structure, for instance, like the orientation, but also the grain size, because if we can see that, we also really can tell, yeah, what is going on the physical perspective in the microstructural level. Now, since we do see differences in our first glance of microstructure analysis, we also expect to see differences in our mechanical properties. And as mechanical property, we were investigating the hardness level. And we basically were measuring the hardness along the center line here. So basically here. And the result is shown on the next slide. Oh, sorry, no. I forgot that I also wanted to share this image with you, where we can basically see the transition region, because if I'm stepping back, these regions here were now really imaged in the center within one beam shape. But what is also interesting to see, because we never had that before, is what is happening in the transition between two beam shapes. And this again emphasizes that we are able to really transfer from a cellular-like structure to a rather columnar structure only by changing our beam shape here. All right, now let's jump back to the hardness measurement again. As already mentioned, we do see differences in temperature and also microstructure, and therefore we expect differences to see also in the micro hardness. And this is true. This can be confirmed by a Vickers hardness test with 0.5 load. Basically, what we can see here is that we get lower hardness values for the point and also the triangular shapes, and higher hardness levels for the square and the ring shape. Since this is done on a single track experiments, we have to interpret these results with cautious. But I think what is really becoming clear is that we are able to really see differences in the micro hardness depending on our beam shape. So far, it has not been understood why we do see higher hardness values for the columnar oriented microstructure, because from theory we would expect to have lower values here, but we are, as I already mentioned, into really digging into microstructural analysis based on EBSD to understand better what is going on here. So the goal of this experiment was rather to really see the full process development, starting from different beam shapes. How do we affect the melt pool? How do we affect the temperature? How do we affect the microstructure on the upper level? And how do we affect the mechanical properties? And I think this was, yeah, feasible to show. This slide just quickly summarizes, again, the findings that I was already referring to. So by being able to change between beam shapes during the powder deposition process, it was able to demonstrate that not only the melt pool shape can be altered, but also the temperature and therefore the microstructure, and as a consequence, also mechanical properties. On the next slide, I would like to share some, well, yeah, future ideas with you, how to transfer that knowledge to the application. So as I already mentioned, this case study was relying on single track experiments. And so the next step would be to really, yeah, scale up, meaning heading to volumetric build-ups, for instance, as shown here. And one approach would be to focus on the microstructure adjustment. And first ideas can already be shown here, where we could see a laminar structure in the center and also the bottom, where one defined beam shape was applied, whereas on the top of the volumetric build-up, a different beam shape was applied and a change in microstructure, namely towards equiaxed grains, was observed. So next to microstructural adjustments in volumetric build-ups, it's also the increase of productivity that can come with different beam shapes. And first insights have been generated here, for instance, with a Civan logo beam shape, a snowflake, and hourglass, which basically steers the melt pool like this. And we could already see a slight increase of our lead height when employing such a steering of the melt pool. Now, I quickly wanted to jump back to the start, where I was referring to the beam shape frequency as a novelty or a, well, yeah, unique property of the beam shape technology provided by Civan. And as you can see here again, this was the spiral. We can see differences in our weld appearance, which basically shows us that we can steer not only the melt pool shape, but also the melt pool or solidification of the melt pool. And so further idea is to really look into how we can use beam shape frequency to steer our process. And last but not least, because this question is occurring from time to time, the technology of Civan basically allows to create arbitrary beam shapes. And the question now is, and what beam shape shall I use? And basically this, yeah, I think is one point that we as a community have to define and find out together, and approaches to really adjust beam shapes or find optimal beam shapes are based on simulation work. So for instance, my colleague Lova Cecic, he developed a heat conduction model that allows to determine, for instance, different approaches like the minimum melt pool temperature and a minimized thermal gradient, and yeah, it really gives you back a intensity distribution that could lead to this, for instance, minimized thermal gradient. All right. This is it from my side. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to answer your questions if there are any.
So thank you, Karen, for the fascinating talk. If anyone has any questions, you could leave them in the Q&A box. We'll be happy to answer. We'll give it another minute to see if anyone has a question. I guess, Karen, you were very clear and you already answered the question ahead of time with your last slide. So I see 2 questions here. So okay, so first question, what was the power and based alloys that you used in your presentation? I guess there were a couple through the slides.
Yeah, so I was using 500 watt throughout the experiment I showed, and I was using H11, a hot working tool steel as material for substrate and powder material.
Thank you. Next question, do you have any experience using the dynamic beam laser for aluminum or titanium?
Not yet. We were focusing on yeah, hot working tool steel and nickel-based alloys so far. Yeah.
Okay. The follow-up question is, could you elaborate more on the potential benefits of beam shaping in volumetric builds or bulk parts? I think that was towards the end, the slide you presented.
Yeah. So the idea is, since I could see differences in the single track experiments for the different beam shapes, that these findings are now, well, yeah, let's say scaled up for volumetric parts. And the idea would be, since I was able to show that we have different hardness values, to really get a grading of the mechanical properties. I think for industrial application, this is interesting because you want, for instance, to have a softer core compared to a harder shell. Yeah, this would be one application that I have in mind. But I'm also happy to learn more from your side, since I saw from the attendee list that a lot of industrial people are also here. If you want to comment on that, I'm happy to learn more.
The next question is about a specific beam shape you presented. So the triangle pointing to the north, I guess, with the side lobe. The question is, can the side lobe be used as a preheating before the actual depositioning with a triangle beam?
Yes, absolutely. I think maybe I was a bit too negative about the side lobes. I think so we have the side lobes, we have to deal with them, and it's up to us to really find the right beam shapes to use them in advance. So one opportunity could be, for instance, to rotate our beam shape in order to get a preheating, as you have mentioned. One other thing could be like to really adjust the thermal gradient based on the rotation of the beam shape or the side lobes, and yeah.
Okay, so the next is more of a comment, which maybe you can talk about a bit if you want. So mentioning that also the beam shaping can be used to improve surface roughness and
Yes.
to minimize porosity in the deposit.
So yeah, we could see an improvement of surface roughness in experiments that we conducted. So basically what we did, we were employing a, let's say, polishing path to the part where we're employing a spiral again. And I tried to point out in my talk that the spiral really allows us to distribute the melt equally. And so we could see an improvement of the surface roughness by having a spiral beam profile used in the end of our volumetric build-up. And regarding porosity, with the materials that we were using so far, we did not have that much of an issue with porosity, mainly because we have already been working with the materials before and quite well knew about our process window. But I think this will become a more relevant point if we're heading towards, for instance, titanium alloys or aluminum alloys, which we still have to investigate here.
Okay, two more questions about your future plans. So the first is you mentioned that you've been using 500 watts in these trials. Do you have plans to use higher powers, which are more common use for direct energy depositioning? And
yes, I
I'll
think
let you
especially,
answer.
sorry, I think especially towards increasing our powder catchment efficiency, this will be relevant. The Civan system, I think I was stating it in the introduction slides, allows us to go up to 14 kilowatt. So we do not have any restrictions there. At least from my knowledge, 16 or 14 kilowatt are more than sufficient in order to really push the limits of that process. I think what is more of a challenge is the mirrors that we are using at the moment, but I'm pretty sure that optics companies are able to help us here, because from our side, the restriction at the moment is really the optics, which allows us to be restricted to 4 kilowatt in our process at the moment.
And the last question. So do you have any plans to use in the future wire feed in the direct energy depositioning? And if so, how do you see beam shaping can help there?
We at the Institute are focusing on the powder based approach. I know that we do have experience in that as well, but the system itself was purely is purely used for the powder-based approach. So no plans for the future here. But I agree that wire-based DD also has a lot of advantages. And I think one thing that needs to be considered here is that we still have the directional dependency on that. But I also know that Civan is able to really switch the beam shape depending on our direction of welding. So I see potentials here as well for the wire-based approach, especially if we're now referring back to the side lobes. I think this can be of benefit here. And again, this beam shape sequence, which allows us to switch, for instance, between the wire and laser material interaction zone itself. So these are my thoughts about that. But as I said, I've never worked with a wire-based approach. So
Okay, then. So thank you all for participating. Thank you, Karen, for the fascinating talk. And the recording of this talk will be sent to everyone who participated. So if you have any more questions or you would like to review something, you'll have the opportunity, and you could reach out either to me or to Karen for any more questions. So thank you, everyone.
thank you.